I'm Elizabeth Streb. I'm an extreme action choreographer, and today I'm speaking about a piece called AIRLINES that I started making in 1986, 2 years after I choreographed a piece called Little Ease, which was a solo for me. And what I thought was I would create as many different vectors. This is a scaffold structure that's completely vertical. And I invented or decided upon in the position of these vectors in this space, which are pretty much, except for this, which is a square, all some form of a rectangle. And I made it out of pipes, and Bruce and Bruce Stage Scenery were my engineers for this piece. And it stood vertically like a swing set would. And the choreography for it speaks about how you try and design something that will get you to a new place in space. And I felt that the bodies in each of these spaces would have to do logical things that were only available to you in that perimeter. And then it's getting into the perimeter of the rectangle / square and getting out of it. And let's say the top of it was 12 feet, because the ceilings in all the Soho lofts, which is where my Canal Street studio was, from 1977 to 1995, was the ceiling. That is as high as you could go. But when I actually tried to get it into just above Midtown, it didn't fit, so I had to cut it off. And I'm only going on about that because the equipment really is the provocateur to what is possible physically in those zones. And also I felt that I wanted to do things no one had ever done, or examine things physically that no one really had thought to examine. When I first went to just above Midtown for my residency prize, and I first put my foot, barefoot, on these pipes, I couldn't believe how painful it was. And all in one fell swoop, I thought, what was I thinking? What's also so interesting, I'd never used mats before this piece. And everybody wanted mats on the ground when they jumped out. And I go, well, do you really need mats? I mean, it's only 12 feet up off the ground. And so there was the realistic argument about what equipment was necessary. And the dancers and I, and all of the groups I've had in all these years, would argue back and forth in a good way about what was necessary. And I was in this piece, so I was still dancing when I had made this piece. You know, I really examined every possible combination of all of these different vectors, and the combination of all these vectors, as you can see, I would put people, you know, there and there and there and there, sort of like the opposite places. And we tried to go from space to space, like from north to south, from south to north, in almost like an anti-gravity way. It was probably one of the clumsiest pieces I've ever made, I will say. And it was not my favorite dance, but I learned so much about the vagaries of designing a set and going to an engineering shop to get them to build it exactly as I wanted it, and then finding out the things I hadn't thought of to think about, like the pipes are really going to be painful. And I think we premiered it in my Canal Street studio in 1988, something like that, and then at the Kitchen, once it had moved to Chelsea in 1991, in a show called Airwork and Groundwork. This is maybe the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14th dance I made that I counted. I made a lot of really bad dances that I don't count. But this is the early way I was trying to clarify what I meant on paper to something happening physically on a piece of equipment. And this happens to be a scaffold. In the end, as we went over and over and over this, because I was cooking in restaurants at the time, and I had a lot of time during the day after I took my 2 dance classes, to see which ones had some residual value, see which ones could actually seem not so clumsy that it wrecked the timing of the moves. And so this ended up being, you can see the pages strewn kind of all over. I was really developing my vocabulary but not just developing my vocabulary, but trying to figure out how was I going to draw my moves, and then decide which ones I would keep and which ones I would throw out. Early on, I was really just using pencil and drawing on, typewriter paper that has lasted pretty well, given it's been quite a few years. But surprisingly enough, I think that what's interesting now for me is that I was maybe one of the first kids on the block that had video equipment, and I spent my first grant, called the CAPS grant, for $3,000 buying video equipment, and I recorded almost everything, even rehearsals that I did. Who knows? I'm not sure where that all is, but it really helped me study the rehearsals and understand what I did the day before, even though I tried to tabulate it in the drawings. As I look at these now, I spent a few days going through Airlines, and there is just no way I could figure out what I was in and what I wasn't in, and what the drawings meant. I can kind of remember now that I've been looking at these for a few weeks.